My name is Leela, and I am 34 years old living in the beautiful and usually quiet neighborhood of Cedarwood Heights, California, where the sun seems to shine just a little bit brighter, and the lawns are always perfectly manicured. But behind every white picket fence, there is a story, and mine involves a man named Brent who moved in next door about 6 months ago and completely ruined the peace and quiet I worked so hard to achieve for myself. I have always been the type of person who values order and respect, and I treat my neighbors with the kind of kindness I expect in return, because that is how I was raised. And that is how a community is supposed to function. But Brent did not seem to get that memo, because from the very first week he moved into the house right next to mine, he began a campaign of arrogance and selfishness that pushed me to the absolute edge of my sanity. I am a freelance graphic designer, which means I work from my home office most of the day, and I rely on the ability to come and go as I please because my clients often have last-minute requests, and I need to be able to run to the print shop or meet a collaborator at a moment's notice without having to worry about whether or not I can actually get my car out of my own property. Brent drives a crusty silver sedan that looks like it has not seen a car wash since the turn of the century. And for some reason, he decided that my driveway was the perfect place to park his vehicle whenever he did not feel like pulling all the way into his own driveway, or when he had friends over, which was almost every single night of the week. The first time it happened, I thought it was just a simple mistake, because moving can be stressful, and maybe he just did not realize where the property line was, even though it is clearly marked by a very obvious concrete curb and a change in the color of the pavement. But I walked over to his house and knocked on the door with a smile on my face, because I wanted to be a good neighbor and introduce myself properly. I told him hello and explained that his car was blocking my exit, and I asked him politely if he could move it just a few feet so I could get out to go pick up some groceries, and he looked at me with this blank expression like I was speaking a foreign language before he finally smirked, and told me he would be right there, and that I should not worry because he was just there for a bit. That phrase became his mantra over the next few months, as he continued to block my driveway at least 3 or 4 times every single week. And every time I confronted him, the answer was always the same, which was that he was just there for a bit. But a bit turned out to be 3 to 5 hours every single time, and I found myself trapped in my own home like a prisoner of his laziness. I tried everything to be reasonable, including leaving polite notes on his windshield with smiley faces and explanations about why I needed the driveway clear, and I even tried to talk to him about the local parking ordinances and how it is actually illegal to block a public or private right-of-way in our city, but he just laughed in my face and told me that I was being way too uptight and that I needed to relax and enjoy the California sunshine. As the weeks turned into months, my frustration began to boil over into a cold and calculated rage, because I realized that Brent did not care about me or my time or my rights as a homeowner, and he viewed my politeness as a weakness that he could exploit for his own convenience. I remember one specific Tuesday afternoon when I had a very important meeting with a high-profile client who was considering me for a massive branding project that would have paid for my mortgage for an entire year. And I walked out to my car only to find that silver sedan parked directly behind me with no room for me to even wiggle out by driving over the grass. I ran to his door and pounded on it with my fist, but no one answered, and I could hear loud music playing inside his house, so I knew he was home. But he was simply ignoring me because he did not want to be bothered to move his car, and I ended up having to call a ride-sharing service, which cost me $40 and made me 15 minutes late for my meeting, which looked incredibly unprofessional, and I am certain it is the reason I did not get the contract. After that day, something inside of me snapped, and I stopped being the nice neighbor who brought over extra lemons from my tree, and I started becoming the woman who was going to teach Brent a lesson he would never forget. I started keeping a detailed log of every single time he blocked me, including the date, the time, and how long the car stayed there. And I took dozens of photos from every angle to prove that he was not just over the line, but completely obstructing my path, because I knew that if I was going to take action, I needed to have undeniable proof of his behavior. The situation got even worse when Brent started hosting these loud parties on weeknights, and his friends would follow his lead and park their cars all over the place, including on my lawn and in front of my mailbox, which meant the mail carrier could not deliver my packages, and I had to drive all the way to the post office across town to pick up my supplies. I tried calling the non-emergency police line several times, but they told me that since it was a residential parking issue, they could not send an officer out immediately. And by the time they did arrive hours later, Brent would have usually moved his car just enough to be technically legal, or he would see the patrol car and run out to move it before they could write a ticket. It felt like I was losing a war of attrition, and my mental health was suffering, because I was constantly on edge and looking out the window to see if I was trapped again, and I hated that this man had so much power over my daily life and my happiness. I tried talking to the homeowners association, but they were equally useless because Brent was a renter, and the actual owner of the house lived in another state and did not seem to care as long as the rent check cleared every month, so I was truly on my own in this fight. The low point came on a rainy Friday evening when I received a phone call that my elderly aunt had been taken to the hospital, and I needed to get there right away to sign some paperwork and provide her medical history. And when I ran out to my car with tears in my eyes, I saw that crusty silver sedan sitting there again, like a giant middle finger pointed right at me. I screamed at the top of my lungs and kicked his tire, which I know was immature, but I was at my breaking point, and I went to his door and screamed for him to move it. But he just yelled through the closed door that he was in the shower and would be out in a bit. I had to wait 45 minutes for him to finally come out, and when he did, he was wearing a bathrobe and smirking like he knew exactly how much he was hurting me, and he did not even apologize as he slowly backed his car up while staring me down the entire time. That was the moment I decided that I was done playing by the rules, and I was going to wait for the perfect opportunity to strike back in a way that would cause him the maximum amount of embarrassment and inconvenience. I spent the next few days researching the local towing companies and finding out which ones had the fastest response times and the most expensive impound fees, because I wanted this to hit him where it hurt, which was his wallet and his ego. I also started paying closer attention to his routine, and I noticed that he had been spending a lot of time grooming himself and cleaning the inside of his car, which usually meant he was trying to impress someone new. I overheard him talking on his phone while he was on his porch one afternoon, and I gathered that he had a big date coming up with a girl he met on a dating application, and he was bragging about how he was going to take her to a fancy steakhouse downtown. This was my opening, and I knew that if I could time it perfectly, I could ruin his night and his reputation all at once. The day of his big date finally arrived, and I watched from my office window as he spent over an hour washing his car in the street, and then he pulled it right back into the same spot, blocking my driveway as if he were daring me to say something. He went inside, and I could see him through his bedroom window, which was directly across from mine, as he splashed on way too much cologne and put on a button-down shirt that looked like it needed a good ironing. He was clearly excited, and I felt a surge of adrenaline because I knew that the tow truck company I had chosen was only 10 minutes away, and they were known for being incredibly efficient and ruthless when it came to unauthorized parking. I waited until I saw him sit down on his couch to wait for his date to arrive, and then I picked up the phone and called the towing service, and I told them that I had a vehicle trespassing on my private property, and that I had all the necessary documentation to prove it was a recurring issue. The dispatcher was very professional and told me a driver was just around the corner and would be there in less than 15 minutes, which was even better than I had hoped for. I went out to my porch and sat in my rocking chair with a cold beer in my hand, acting like I was just enjoying the evening breeze while I waited for the drama to unfold. Sure enough, a massive black tow truck pulled onto our street a few minutes later, and the driver hopped out with a look of pure determination. He asked me if I was the one who called, and I showed him my identification and the property lines, and I told him that the silver sedan had been warned multiple times and was currently preventing me from leaving my home. The driver did not waste a single second, and he backed his truck up to the front of Brent's car and began the process of hooking it up to the lift. It was like watching a professional athlete at work, because he was so fast and quiet that I do not think Brent even heard anything over the sound of the music he was playing inside to set the mood for his date. Within 5 minutes, the silver sedan was hoisted into the air and secured with heavy chains, and the driver gave me a nod and a thumbs up before he pulled away and disappeared around the corner. I sat there in the silence of the evening, feeling a sense of peace that I had not felt in months, and I took a long sip of my beer as I waited for the second act of my plan to begin. About 45 minutes after the car was gone, I saw a small white car pull up to the curb, and a young woman stepped out looking absolutely stunning in a red dress and high heels. She looked at her phone and then looked at the house numbers, and I realized this was the date, and she was arriving right on time. She walked up the sidewalk and knocked on Brent's door, and I saw him open it with a huge grin on his face, acting like he was the king of the world. He stepped out onto the porch and gestured toward the street where his car should have been, and the look of pure confusion that washed over his face was better than any movie I have ever seen. He started walking toward the edge of the lawn looking left, and right as if his car had somehow grown legs and walked away on its own, while the girl stood there with her hands on her hips, looking very confused. He started patting his pockets for his keys, and then he started circling the spot where the car had been parked as if he thought it might be invisible. He was flipping out and waving his arms around, and I could hear him muttering about how someone must have stolen his car in broad daylight. The girl was asking him what was going on and if he was sure he parked it there, and he was getting more and more frustrated and started raising his voice, which is never a good look on a first date. That was my cue to get involved, so I stood up from my chair and walked down to the edge of my porch and called out to him in a very casual and friendly voice. I told him that if he was looking for his car, it had been towed about half an hour ago because it was blocking my driveway again, and I reminded him that we had discussed this many times before. Brent turned toward me, and his face was a shade of red I did not know was possible, and he started screaming at me about how I had ruined his night and how I was a horrible neighbor and how he was going to make me pay for the impound fees. He tried to argue with me in front of the girl, saying that he was only there for a bit and that I should have come and talked to him first, but I just looked at him and said that I had tried talking to him for 6 months, and he never listened, so I decided to let the professionals handle it this time. The girl was watching this entire exchange with a look of pure disgust on her face, and she turned to Brent and asked him if he really parked in front of my driveway after I had asked him not to. Brent tried to explain and make himself out to be the victim, but the girl just shook her head and told him that what he did was trashy, and that she did not want to go on a date with someone who was so disrespectful to their neighbors. She turned around and walked right back to her car without looking back, and I watched as she drove away, leaving Brent standing there in the middle of the street in his fancy clothes with no car and no date. He spent the next hour on the phone with the police and the towing company, and I could hear him yelling about how unfair it was, but they clearly told him the same thing I did, which was that he was in the wrong. He had to call an expensive taxi to take him to the impound lot, which was all the way on the other side of the county. And I found out later that the total cost for the tow, the storage, and the fine was over $500. When he finally got his car back the next morning, he didn't even look at my house, and he parked it all the way in the back of his own driveway behind his roommate's car where it belonged. For the first time in 6 months, I was able to leave my house on a Saturday morning without having to worry about being blocked in, and the silence from next door was the sweetest sound I have ever heard. Brent avoided me for weeks, and he even started taking a different route to his front door, just so he would not have to walk past my porch, but I didn't care because I had finally won the respect that I was owed. The word got around the neighborhood about what happened, and several other neighbors came over to thank me because they had also been frustrated with his parking habits, but they were too afraid to do anything about it. One of the ladies who lives down the street even brought me a plate of cookies and told me that I was a hero for standing up to the neighborhood bully. I learned that sometimes being nice is not enough, and you have to be willing to take a stand and show people that there are consequences for their actions, especially when they think the rules do not apply to them. Cedarwood Heights is back to being the peaceful place I love, and I have not seen that crusty silver sedan anywhere near my driveway since that night. I still see Brent every now and then when I am out gardening, and he looks like he wants to say something, but he always thinks better of it and just keeps walking, which is exactly how I like it. I realized that my revenge was not just about the car or the driveway, but about reclaiming my own sense of peace and making sure that I was no longer a victim in my own home. It was a long road to get there, and I had to endure a lot of stress and frustration, but the look on his face when his date walked away was worth every single second of it. I am 34 years old, and I have learned that life is too short to let people walk all over you, and sometimes the best way to handle a problem is to just stay calm and wait for the right moment to let the tow truck do the heavy lifting for you. I even ended up getting that big branding project I wanted because I was able to show up to the follow-up meeting early and fully prepared without any car drama holding me back. My office is quiet, and my driveway is clear, and every time I look out the window and see that empty space where his car used to be, I feel a little bit of joy in my heart. I have become a bit of a legend on my block, and now whenever someone new moves in, I make sure to introduce myself and let them know that we have a very friendly but very firm policy about driveways, and everyone seems to understand exactly what I mean. The moral of the story is that you should always respect the people you live next to, because you never know when they might be sitting on their porch with a cold beer and a towing company on speed dial. Brent eventually moved out about 2 months ago because he said the neighborhood was too restrictive for his lifestyle, which is just a fancy way of saying he wanted to go somewhere where he could be a jerk without getting caught. But the new family that moved in is wonderful, and they always make sure to park their minivan exactly where it belongs. I feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders, and I can finally enjoy my home again without the constant fear of being trapped. I even kept one of the photos I took of his car being towed, and I have it tucked away in a drawer as a reminder that I am capable of taking care of myself, and that justice is sometimes served on the back of a flatbed truck. The weather in California is still beautiful, and the sun is still shining, and my life is back to being as orderly and respectful as I always wanted it to be, and I know that I did the right thing by standing up for myself in a way that was effective and permanent. I hope that wherever Brent is now, he has learned to check the signs and respect the property lines of others. But even if he hasn't, he is someone else's problem now, and I am just happy to have my driveway back for good. It is funny how such a small thing like a parking spot can cause so much trouble, but it was never really about the car, it was about the lack of respect, and I am glad that I was the one who got to teach him that lesson. My name is Leela, and I am a graphic designer, a homeowner, and a woman who knows exactly how to handle a neighbor who thinks he owns the world. I spent thousands of hours feeling small and ignored, but in the end, I was the one standing tall on my porch while he was left standing in the street. I have never been one for drama, but this was one story that I was happy to write the ending to, and it was a perfect ending in every single way. The neighborhood is quiet once again, and the only cars I see in front of my house are the ones that are supposed to be there, and I can finally breathe easy knowing that my home is truly my sanctuary again. I sometimes wonder if that girl ever found a guy who knows how to park properly, but I have a feeling she is doing just fine, and probably tells the story of the guy whose car got towed on their first date to all of her friends. It is a story that brings a smile to my face every time I think about it, and I wouldn't change a single thing about how it all went down because it was the most satisfying moment of my entire life. I have grown more confident, and I am no longer afraid to set boundaries with people in all areas of my life, whether it is work or personal relationships, because I know that I have the strength to enforce them if I need to. Cedarwood Heights is a better place because I stood my ground, and I will continue to protect my peace and my property with everything I have. The crusty silver sedan is gone, and Brent is gone, and all that is left is the quiet beauty of my neighborhood and the knowledge that I am in control of my own destiny. I look forward to many more years of clear driveways and respectful neighbors, and I will always remember the night that I took my power back one tow truck at a time. It was a long journey from being the quiet neighbor to being the one who took action, but it was a journey that I needed to take for my own growth and happiness. I am proud of myself for how I handled it, and I am proud of the life I have built for myself here in California, where the sun shines on people who respect others, and the tow trucks take care of the rest. Every time I drive my car in and out of my garage, I feel a sense of freedom that I never realized was so fragile until it was taken away, and I will never take it for granted again. I am Leela, and I am finally at peace in my own home, and that is the best revenge I could ever ask for. The memory of Brent's face as he watched his date drive away is a gift that keeps on giving, and I hope he carries that lesson with him for a very long time, so he never treats another person the way he treated me. I have learned that sometimes you have to create your own justice, and when you do it with patience and precision, it is the most rewarding feeling in the world, and I am grateful for the experience because it made me a stronger and more resilient person in the end. I am happy and I am free, and my driveway is wide open for whatever the future holds.